Super Retro Force.
I just played Lufia 2, Rise of the Sinistrals for the first time. Strap yourselves in because I'm ready to tell you all about my experiences in today's review. Lufia 2, Rise of the Sinistrals was released on February 24th, 1995 for the Super Nintendo. If you recall, this was the first game on my list of must-play JRPGs still in my backlog. Well, I went ahead and fixed that issue and it's no longer on that backlog. I've heard so much about Lufia 2, and how it defines the genre, how it's one of the best RPGs ever created, how you aren't a JRPG fan if you don't play it, all that kind of jazz. But now that I've played it, and I can be considered a JRPG fan again, I want to talk about Lufia 2. Its pros, its cons, and how it felt to play in 2024. But before we get into the whole shebang, do you like JRPGs? What about lists and reviews about JRPGs? Well, if you do, consider hitting that like button, subscribing to the channel, and let me know. What do you think about Lufia 2? Let's get discussing the comments about this classic. With that being said, it's time to jump into today's video, so pull up a chair, grab a drink, and get ready to hear all about Lufia 2, Rise of the Sinistrals. In Lufia 2, you take the role of Maxim. Maxim is a swordsman from the town of Elcid. He hunts monsters and sells the remains of those monsters to the shopkeeper, his longtime friend Tia. Day in and day out, nothing really changes. Pretty boring life for a talented swordsman, I'd say. However, one day the town mayor gets word that there's a monster outbreak in the cave north of Elcid, and Maxim is put in charge of dealing with it, and recovering the cavern key from the goblin leader. Being naturally skilled in the way of the blade, Maxim deals with it with very little difficulty. However, after recovering this key, a mysterious woman named Iris appears and tells him that he is destined to save the world, which is threatened by the Four Sinistrals, a group of superpowered godlike beings that just want to destroy the world. These Sinistrals are Gades, the Sinistral of Destruction, Amon, the Sinistral of Chaos, Aram, the Sinistral of Death, and their leader, Deus. No, not that Deus. This Deus, the Sinistral of Terror. They are all incredibly powerful and destroy whole towns with the snap of a finger and have no remorse, just showing how terrifying they can be. Along the way, Maxim is joined by his friend Tia, who has a very obvious crush on Maxim, and Maxim honestly is completely oblivious to it in true JRPG hero fashion. Then you have Guy, he's a charismatic warrior, Dakar, the Bound Kingdom Prince's bodyguard, who is full of himself and self-proclaims that he is the strongest in the world. Lexus, the inventor, Artea, the elven bowman, and Salon, the commander of the Parcelite army. So at this point, I'm going to jump into spoiler territory, so if you don't want to be spoiled on the story, jump to the timestamp above here. Okay. So first thing I want to talk about is Salon and Tia. When you start the game, and throughout the first third of the game, Tia seems to be the romantic interest. She's sweet, she's cute, she's very much so in love with Maxim, and does everything she can to let him know this. Looks like the perfect possible relationship, if only Maxim wasn't so oblivious. Once you get to Parcelite, you meet Salon. She really doesn't trust you or have any interest in being around Maxim. Honestly, at this point, she's super unlikable. Carry on a little bit, there's a scene where the party fights Gades, and Maxim is supposed to die at this moment. Maxim survives, and almost on a dime, Salon totally does a 180 of her personality to the point where Salon and Maxim get married, and they even have a child. You see, this scene is where Tia says, "Don't tell Maxim where I am, I'm just gonna disappear." It's possibly one of the most heartbreaking moments in any game I have ever played. I understand that Maxim sees her as a sister, and Tia doesn't love Maxim the hero, but instead loves Maxim the person and would want him to settle down, ultimately getting in the way and causing the world to end because Maxim couldn't fulfill his destiny. I feel this could have been handled more naturally, maybe in a way that doesn't shatter my heart into a million pieces. This scene was just painful to watch, because she holds back her tears, because she doesn't believe in crying, because it's completely different if a girl cries. Don't worry, Tia. I cried for you. I cried for you. It's at this point that Tia leaves the party forever, is nowhere to be seen, and you don't see her again until the end credits. This is another thing that bothers me with the story. You get so many characters that join you and leave you several times throughout the story, and you don't get your full party until about 85 to 90% through the game. And in addition to that, when a character leaves, they leave with all of the equipment they had on. There's no warning. They're just all, see ya bro. Also, I'm taking this. Anyways, at the end of the game, you defeat the 4 Sinistrals. However, Maxim and Salon are sacrificed in the effort and fall asleep one last time together and become spirits that travel the world forever together. After the credits, there's one more scene with Maxim and Salon's son, along with his friend Lufia, only to say this is to be continued in Lufia 1. Yes, this is a prequel to Lufia 1, so it has its connections. Lufia 2 has a really good story. It may be basic and simplistic, especially by today's standards, but the characters are amazing and really make it an experience I won't soon forget. Alright, so let's move on to the gameplay. Combat in Lufia 2 is, well, it's a turn-based RPG. Standard turn-based structure. Choose action, perform action, wait for your next turn. Everything you've seen before, but where Lufia 2 stands out is its IP system. When you take damage, you build up your IP gauge. Once you build up enough of your IP gauge, you can unleash IP skills. These IP skills are attached to your equipment and can be completely broken. From things like buff your stats, debuff enemies, pull off special elemental attacks, or even attack 8 times in a row. The IP system is essentially like a limit system you might encounter in, say, Final Fantasy VII. I really like the IP system because it gives another layer to what equipment you might want to use. So instead of equipment just being used for higher stats, you might want to sacrifice a few stat points in order to have a better IP skill. I love having an additional layer of strategy. It makes you think when buying new equipment. Unfortunately, you can't change equipment mid-battle to take advantage of this IP system. It would be nice, but let's be honest, it's probably going to be a bit broken. There's one incredibly hard fight that you're meant to lose, but with the right strategy and IP skills, it's entirely possible to win. Developing unique strategies like this to win seemingly unwinnable fights feels super good and helps breathe new life into a possibly bland combat system. Alright, so that's it in regards to the combat, but what about dungeons? Oh boy, these dungeons are freaking fantastic. What is one aspect in current JRPGs that is uncommon or downright non-existent? That's right, it's puzzles. Puzzles have all but vanished in modern day JRPGs. And thankfully, Lufia 2 is full of them. In fact, there are so many dungeons and puzzles in this game that I'd say most of it is spent in dungeons. The dungeons of Lufia 2 instantly reminded me of the Wild Arms series. Before you attack me in the comments, I understand that Lufia 2 came out before the first Wild Arms. But remember, I didn't play Lufia 2 until this year, so naturally it's going to remind me of the game I played first. Anyways, in Lufia 2, you get various tools: arrows, fire arrows, bombs, hookshot, and a ball and chain. These tools are used in conjunction with one another to solve all kinds of puzzles. You might need to bomb holes in a wall or hookshot across gaps, hit a distance switch with an arrow, and so on. Not all puzzles use the tools though. Sometimes you need to press switches in the correct order, or even find hidden switches. It's such a nice experience to have all kinds of puzzles to make dungeons interesting as opposed to running from beginning to end. Dungeons and the puzzles are clearly the focus of Lufia 2, as the story scenes are incredibly short. Like seriously, I mean like 2 to 3 minutes long, just to push you into the next puzzle-filled dungeon. It was a nice change from all of the JRPGs that I've played recently. The last thing I want to talk about is the Ancient Cavern. The Ancient Cavern is something that I've never seen in a JRPG before. In fact, it's almost like an entire separate game within Lufia 2. If you're familiar with roguelikes, you'll be right at home with the Ancient Cavern. When you enter the Ancient Cavern, you go down to level 1. You have no equipment and only 10 potions, despite what you may or may not have had in your inventory, and this entire dungeon is randomly generated. The goal of the Ancient Cavern is to go in with absolutely nothing and only get the equipment and items that you find in the dungeon. This means that you can either get incredibly powerful right away, or die mere minutes into the dungeon and forced to try all over again. Now, I've never really been a huge fan of roguelikes, but having it with a turn-based battle system is honestly really unique. This dungeon is completely optional, but you can find some very powerful equipment in this dungeon. There are 2 types of chests. Red chests. The items in these chests disappear once you leave the dungeon. Or you can find ultra rare blue treasure chests. These items can be brought back into the main game with you, and they can be brought back into the cave with you for subsequent runs, making future runs easier. I know there are lots of people that play Lufia 2 solely for this dungeon. I wasn't a huge fan of it, but I can understand why people could spend hundreds and hundreds of hours solely on this ancient cavern. Possibly the first roguelike game ever? I'm not 100% sure about that. If you know what the first roguelike is, be sure to let me know in the comments below. Have you ever played a game not expecting much from the soundtrack and get pleasantly blown away? So generally before I play a game, I take a look at the composer to see if I played anything that they might have worked on, and so I know a little bit of what to expect. Lufia 2 was composed by Yasunori Shiono. Honestly, I had not ever heard of this composer before. So I look it up, and more or less all he's worked on are the Lufia games and a couple old Sharp 68000 soundtracks. So naturally, I wasn't expecting much, but honestly, I was pleasantly surprised. The music in Lufia 2 is fantastic. I have to mention the Sinistral battle theme. This is possibly one of the best boss themes I have ever heard. I don't know what it is, but it just sounds so good. It invokes that fear of terror when you're fighting the Sinistrals, which even in battle, all you see is a giant portrait, and you are just a little tiny sprite. It fits the battles so perfectly. Then you have the world map theme, the town themes. There's no disappointment at all. The only music that sounded a little bit generic was the mountainous dungeons. They weren't bad by any means, I enjoyed them, but they didn't really stand out. For the most part though, the music was absolutely fantastic, and if you don't want to spend the time playing through the entirety of Lufia 2, pop up the soundtrack and just listen to it while you're chilling out around the house. You will not be disappointed. Well, okay, so let's talk about how long you should expect to spend with Lufia 2. As per the usual with RPGs, it depends on what you want out of the experience. If you just rush through the game, don't spend any time grinding, ignore the ancient cavern and just binge the story, and maybe minimally struggle with some of the puzzles, it might take you about 20 to 25 hours. Or you could spend hundreds of hours in the ancient cavern, if you could be like me and figure out that you can grind stat increasing potions and get addicted to stat potion grinding. Go ahead and spend 75 hours doing nothing but grinding for stats. This is by no means necessary. On average though, you might expect to play for maybe 35 to 40 hours on a regular playthrough. As for the pacing, it's great for someone like myself that is gameplay oriented. Cutscenes are super short. I don't think a single cutscene lasted for more than 5 minutes. They seem to only exist to push you into the next dungeon. That's not a complaint. As I mentioned, I love the gameplay aspect of RPGs, so having quick and concise cutscenes that don't overstay their welcome or feel bloated is incredibly appreciated. I was quite happy with the pacing of Lufia 2. It made the game incredibly enjoyable. So there you have it, Lufia 2 is a classic that has stood the test of time and is up there as one of the best JRPGs that I have ever played. Even with my Tia and Celan beef, I'd rank it as high as an 8 or 9 personally. The puzzles are unique and the characters are so lovable. If you love JRPGs, you owe it to yourself to give this game a shot. Have you played Lufia 2 Rise of the Sinistrals before? If so, what did you think about it? And if not, have I convinced you to give it a shot? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video and want more JRPG content, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to my channel, and ding that notification bell so you don't miss any of my future videos. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, have a wonderful day.